Did you know that the Earth has been around for over 4.5 billion years? That's a really long time. And during that time, our planet has changed a lot. The continents have moved, the climate has changed, and life has evolved in all sorts of amazing ways. And one of the most fascinating examples of this evolution is the elephant. Elephants are some of the most iconic creatures on our planet. They're huge, they're intelligent, and they're incredibly social. But did you know that they've been around for over 50 million years? That's right, elephants have been around for more than 500 million years. And during that time, they've changed a lot. So let's take a journey back in time and explore the evolution of the elephant. More than 50 million years ago, at the beginning of the Eocene epoch, an age when the Earth was warming up, mammals were just starting to diversify. There were also lots of flowering plants around, which gave rise to new food sources. And it was at this time that the earliest known relative of elephants, a small mammal called Moeritherium, appeared. Moeritherium was about the size of a pig and had a long face and snout, kind of like a pig. It lived in the swamps of Egypt and northern Africa, where it spent its days looking for food. It was here that scientists think the story of elephants began. Like modern-day elephants, Moeritherium were herbivores and likely fed mostly on aquatic plants. They probably waded into the shallow water, using their snouts to find food. And they also used their tails to swat away pesky flies while they ate. But despite being related to elephants, they didn't look or live exactly like them. Instead, they preferred life in the water and were most active during the day. They also walked on 4 legs instead of 2. Over the next several million years, the lineage leading to modern-day elephants split off from other relatives and continued to evolve, gradually changing over time. Some of these ancient ancestors had longer jaws and stronger teeth, allowing them to eat more fibrous plants. This group of mammals slowly grew larger, and after about 10 million years, they looked much more like modern-day elephants, except they still had 4 legs. These 4-legged proto-elephants roamed across Africa and Asia, and they were the ancestors of every elephant species that came after them, including the giants. About 3 million years ago, as Africa began to dry out, grasslands replaced forests in many areas. And with this change came a need for a new kind of mammal, one that could travel great distances across the savannas in search of food and water. And so some of the larger 4-legged mammals started walking on their tippy toes, eventually standing up on 2 legs. This was a major evolutionary leap forward, one that allowed elephants to become the largest land mammals on the planet. As the family tree of elephants continued to grow, different species began to appear, each adapted to its own environment. One such species was the gomphothere, which lived in forests. They had shorter tusks than modern-day elephants, but their molars were much larger, allowing them to process more vegetation at once. Another relative, the mastodon, was a giant with thick, short fur that preferred the forests of Central and South Africa. At 9 feet tall and weighing 6 tons, it was about the size of a modern-day African bush elephant, but it was much heavier. Because of its size, the mastodon was likely an herbivore, feeding mostly on shrubs and trees. As the climate cooled, the forests shrank and the grasslands grew. And with this change came a new kind of elephant, one that was perfectly adapted for life in the Ice Age tundras. Enter the mammoth. Mammoths were huge, furry creatures with long, curved tusks that could reach 16 feet in length. They were well adapted for life in cold climates and lived in herds that migrated from place to place in search of food. Scientists believe that mammoths were social animals who cared for their young and mourned their dead. They likely communicated with each other using sounds similar to the rumbles of a modern-day elephant. And just like today, females probably did most of the work when it came to finding food and taking care of their young. The exact origin of mammoths is still debated, but scientists think they first appeared in Africa around 5 million years ago, before migrating north as the climate cooled. There were actually 2 different kinds of mammoths, the woolly mammoth and the steppe mammoth. As their names suggest, they lived in different places. The woolly mammoth lived in Europe and Asia and had long, curved tusks and a thick coat of fur. The steppe mammoth lived in the open grasslands of southern Siberia and had shorter, straighter tusks and a thinner coat of fur. During the Pleistocene epoch, which lasted from 2.6 million to 11,700 years ago, giant relatives of elephants roamed across the earth. The mastodons and mammoths were the largest of these creatures, and they were perfectly adapted for life in their respective environments. However, not all ancient relatives of elephants were giants. In fact, some were quite small. For example, the dwarf elephant, which lived in southern Africa, was only about the size of a modern-day Asian elephant. It had short, stubby tusks and a thick coat of fur, and it preferred to live in forested areas. It wasn't just the size of their tusks that varied, though. Some ancient relatives of elephants had tusks on only one side of their heads, while others had tusks on both sides. Some had tusks that curved upwards, while others had tusks that curved downwards. In fact, there was so much variation among ancient elephants that it can be difficult to tell them apart. But thankfully, there are other ways to distinguish them besides their tusks. For example, their teeth can tell us what they ate, and their bones can tell us how they moved. For example, the teeth of ancient elephants were adapted to the plants that they ate. Elephants that ate mostly grass had teeth that were good for grinding, while elephants that ate mostly leaves and twigs had teeth that were good for crushing. Their bones can also tell us how they moved. Elephants that were good at running had long, slender legs, while elephants that were good at swimming had short, sturdy legs. One of the most famous ancient elephants is, of course, the woolly mammoth. The woolly mammoth was a large mammal that lived in Eurasia during the Pleistocene epoch. It was well adapted to cold climates and is thought to have gone extinct during the Holocene epoch, which began about 11,700 years ago. Woolly mammoths were closely related to modern-day elephants and shared many similarities with them. However, they also had some key differences. For example, woolly mammoths had thicker fur and longer tusks than modern-day elephants. They also had a distinctive stepped molar pattern, which is a series of ridges on their molars that were adapted for grinding tough vegetation. Woolly mammoths are believed to have first appeared in Siberia and migrated to other parts of Eurasia as the climate cooled. They lived in herds and are thought to have communicated with each other using low-frequency sounds. Woolly mammoths played an important role in the ecosystem as they helped to disperse plants by eating berries and other fruits and then pooping them out elsewhere. They were also a source of food and materials for humans during the Ice Age. Humans began hunting woolly mammoths using spears and other weapons made of stone and bone. They also used mammoth bones for shelter and clothing, and even carved statues out of them. Cave paintings and other artifacts suggest that woolly mammoths were an important part of human culture during the Ice Age. The extinction of woolly mammoths is thought to have been caused by a combination of factors, including climate change and hunting by humans. As the climate warmed, the cold grasslands that woolly mammoths needed to survive began to disappear. Additionally, as humans spread throughout Eurasia, they likely hunted woolly mammoths for food and other resources. The last known population of woolly mammoths was on Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean, where they survived until about 4,000 years ago. Today, only 3 species of elephants are alive: the African bush elephant, the African forest elephant, and the Asian elephant. African bush elephants are the largest living land mammals and can weigh up to 6 tons. They have large ears that help them to cool down, and small bumps on their tusks that make them look like they have a second set of tusks. African forest elephants are smaller than bush elephants and have straighter tusks. Asian elephants are smaller than both African species and have smaller ears and thicker skin. All 3 species are endangered due to habitat loss and poaching. Despite their size and strength, elephants are threatened by humans. They are often killed for their ivory tusks, which are highly valued in the illegal wildlife trade. Elephants are also losing their habitat, as forests are cut down for agriculture and development. This has led to a decline in elephant populations, and has put these majestic creatures at risk of extinction. But not all ancient relatives of elephants went extinct. In fact, we have